Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech. Visor is the tool you need to manage Chromebooks and other IT assets in your school district. Visor has teamed up with Jake Miller to offer our listeners a free signed copy of his book, Educational Duct Tape. Go to visor.cloud/loveedtech. That's VIZOR.cloud/loveedtech to find out more. Joining us today is Sarah Schroeder, who is a professor at the University of Cincinnati. And also, we have a guest co-host today, who is Deb Cheerhart, who works with me at SOIDA. So, hey to both of you.
Hey, Kara.
Hey, excited to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We're excited to talk to you about all your work in education and instructional design. So I think it'll be a good conversation. But first, I want to know your journey into education and how you ended up where you are.
Sure. So my journey into education and educational technology in particular was a little bit roundabout. I wanted to be on Broadway. But my parents said, you need a practical degree when I went to college. And I just fell in love with teaching and education with my education degree at Indiana University, go IU. And I got my license to teach theater as well. So I was a theater teacher and an English teacher at a high school in Cincinnati, and also did quite a bit of work at a high school in Ellettsville, Indiana, Edgewood High School. And, then I started to want to just kind of think through, when you're a 22-year-old going into teaching and you're teaching 18-year-old seniors, that's a tough place to be. That's a hard start to your education career. So I moved to Los Angeles in an early midlife crisis and just sold everything I had and hopped in my car.
Oh my gosh, the Hollywood dream.
And worked in the television and film industry in Los Angeles for about 3 years. Got really interested in media, especially media for social justice and media with a purpose. And so I went back to school after that and got my master's degree in communication. So I have an undergraduate degree in education and a master's degree in communication. And this was before there were master's degrees in instructional design. When I was an undergrad, the technology class we had to take taught us how to hyperlink slides on PowerPoint. And that was huge.
That was wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Huge. So I always joke that I don't joke, but I tell my students that they probably don't even know yet what they're going to do in the end in their career, because that job may not exist. And that's kind of how instructional design happened for me. It didn't exist when I was in school. But as I went through my master's degree and was learning more about representation in the media and technology in that capacity, which was my focus, was representation in the media in my master's degree. I went from there to working in higher education as a freshman advisor and teaching public speaking at Northern Kentucky University. So my office just happened to be in one of those places right inside the main office door of the communication department at NKU, where people would go, hey, you're pretty good with Blackboard. Do you think you could help me with this? Right? You're pretty good at this. Do you think you could help me with this? So I fell into educational technology by being right inside the main door of the department and in my office a lot because I was an academic advisor. So I started to really enjoy helping faculty solve problems in their classes and find solutions for things they wanted to do. And I started going to every workshop I could at NKU. And when they hired their first round of full-time instructional designers, I was the first one hired and just taught myself how to do instructional design. And then I transitioned to University of Cincinnati, where I coordinate all of our educational technology courses for our undergrads and our digital learning design certificate. And I also coordinate all of our foundations courses for our incoming students in the School of Education. So it was a roundabout way to get to educational technology, very self-taught, but it was worth it. I always say if I hadn't done everything I wanted to do in my life before I landed here, I wouldn't love my job as much as I do. So that is my journey to ed tech and instructional design.
That's really cool. I'm curious what you've seen, like how instructional design, I guess, has evolved.
So I think initially instructional designers were really, just get it into the LMS kind of people, right?
Like figure out how to take their in-person and just get it into a digital format.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first became an instructional designer, one of the things I did, which I found out later was fairly unique and not a lot of people were doing it, but my method was go watch the instructor teach. So if I was assigned a course, because I designed courses from, oh my goodness, neuroscience to business, and I didn't know the content clearly. I was an English teacher, like neuroscience, not in my wheelhouse. And so I would go if they taught a face-to-face class, and I would physically sit in their classroom, for a week or two and take notes on their teaching style and what was going well and what were the students responding to. And then I would sit down with them and ask them about, their course evaluations and what challenges were they seeing in their class that they wanted to solve when they moved into the online environment. And then when we started working in Blackboard in those early days, it was really about just helping the instructor convert from a face-to-face to an online class and keep it organized. So keep it organized, keep it simple. I think one of the things that I saw really evolve over time was instructional designers becoming also graphic designers and becoming multimedia designers and becoming coaches and becoming teachers and becoming problem solvers, where when the systems were really simple, it was a lot easier. Now we have so many more tools available to us that it's a lot about choosing the right tool and advising the IT department on what teachers and students need. With Quality Matters coming out, which if you're familiar with Quality Matters, it's a national organization based on research with kind of the gold standard in instructional design. And there's a K-12 QM and there's higher ed QM, but it's just a rubric you can use to see if you're doing what your students need. When that first came out and people started getting QM certified, then we really saw kind of the quality assurance model being applied to instructional design and instructional designers being advocates for the students and saying, hey, you're not the end user of this faculty member or teacher. Like, sorry, the student is the end user. So we have to design it for them, not for you, which caused some challenges, right? But I love that about instructional design. I love that I'm an advocate for the students. I love that it takes a lot of my strengths, which I think my story is really important because it also shows that you don't have to have a master's degree in instructional design or a master's degree in education. You have to have creativity and flexibility, and you have to be able to design backwards, really understand what it is you want your students doing at the end. I think right now it's a tough time in instructional design because there are so many tools and technologies. There is so much you have to stay updated on, and you have to be an expert in so many things to really do it well, that it's a challenging time for instructional designers. I think it's just their skills keep having to be upped.
So do you think that it's hard for people to let go of the fact that they don't, all of those skills you said, they have to be really good at this and that and the other. Do you think it's hard for instructional designers to accept the fact that they don't have to be the content expert? They are just assisting the content expert? Or do you think those are completely integrated?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think instructional designers expect to not be the content expert most of the time. They really see themselves as a facilitator of the learning, of a coach. And that's one of the best parts of instructional design, is being able to see a project go from start to finish and then fix it, because it's iterative. So you have to have this attitude of continuous improvement. You can't get so attached to your stuff that you get your feelings hurt when somebody wants to change it or when it doesn't work.
Right, like a
Which
good
I
teacher,
think,
right? So you should be evaluating every year, and you have to adjust your curriculum and what you're doing for the group of students that you have that year.
yeah, absolutely. I've just found to be a good instructional designer, you really have to be a good listener, probably a lot like an instructional coach or a technology coach in a K-12 building. Like, you have to be a really good listener and hear the person you're working with and their needs, but then also put the students' needs, at the front. And it can be challenging, but I love instructional design for that reason. It keeps you on your toes, and every day looks different.
I probably should have asked this to begin with, but I'm curious how you would define instructional design.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I still consider myself an instructional designer, but I am no longer a full-time instructional designer at the University of Cincinnati. It used to be years ago, you would have one instructional designer for an entire university.
Oh
And
my
now, like,
gosh.
every program has their own instructional design team because they've realized how important that is and how it improves the instruction. But even though I don't do full-time instructional design anymore, I think every teacher needs to be an instructional designer as well and have that mindset. So all of our pre-service teachers right now are learning instructional design as well before they go out into the field. So they're learning backward design. They're learning to evaluate their materials for readability and accessibility and engagement. And all of that is part of instructional design. Like, are you considering universal design for learning? Are you designing for a variable learner? Are you thinking about digital divide? All of these different considerations. And I think an instructional designer is really someone that takes the curriculum and considers how we're going to design the experience. So you even see some language changing in terms of job titles, where people are now called learning experience designers, which it's still instructional design. It's just instruction focuses on the teacher as a word versus learning, which focuses on the student. So you'll see learning designers, instructional designers, learner experience designers, and it's all instructional design, basically.
Okay.
Do you find that the professors now are more open to taking their courses, teaching online? I mean, everybody was pushed into it, a couple of years ago, but I was thinking about when you first started and people started pulling you in. You were the first instructional designer hired at NKU. So were these teachers or professors you were working with, were they ones who were interested in doing that, or were they struggling because that was what the direction was and they were doing the best they could?
I think more often than not, back in those early days, that was the direction things were going. And so we all have to step in line. And faculty struggled a lot with that. We also didn't have quite the same resources available to us that we have now to encourage that engagement with students online. So it was challenging because they felt like they were talking into a void. They were losing the relationships with their students. So it was a challenge. Now I think COVID has completely, that was 20 years ago, right? So that was a long time ago. Now, since COVID, not all faculty like to teach online, and some faculty love to teach online. Some teachers love to teach online. My daughter was in online school for 3 years. So when COVID hit, she was already in an online school. So it didn't take any adjustment for us. And her teachers loved it, because they had the right resources. They had the right support. They had the time to put into it. And they had the skills that were needed to be successful in that environment. And so, I love teaching face-to-face personally. And I think instructional design impacts face-to-face classes just as much as online. But I also don't mind teaching online. It's not difficult for me, but my personality is I prefer to see my students face-to-face. But for some instructors, they feel much more comfortable teaching behind a camera. And so I do think we need to consider the comfort level of the teachers with the technology, with their lifestyle, with their needs. their confidence level with all of it. When we're deciding if a class needs to go online, just forcing a teacher who doesn't work well in that space to teach fully online. We saw what happened with COVID. But I think, Deb, to answer your question, yeah, there's resistance sometimes, but one thing that's really been found over the years is that you find those teachers who want to do it, and you're going to have much better success. You're going to have better student experiences. You're going to have better student satisfaction, better instructor satisfaction than if we're forcing people to go online.
Yeah, for sure. And considering their situation, I like that, or like their personality and
their skill level, their comfort, all of it.
Teachers, you can now earn contact hours toward grad credit for listening to the podcast.
Visit fortheloveofedtech.org for more information.
I'm curious to hear from you, since you work with pre-service teachers and you've seen a lot of different classrooms from K through 12. What should people, or I guess teachers, be considering when they're creating digital learning activities or just digital content that their students are going to engage with? What do you think is the most important thing for them to consider?
This probably isn't a super innovative or new answer, but I think they really need to consider why they're making the choices they are. That's always one of my first questions when I work with a teacher in a school building, and they say, I remember working with a principal one time who said, such and such school has smart tables. We need smart tables. Well, smart tables are very expensive. Number one, they take a lot of upkeep. And I said, why do you want smart tables? And he said, well, because such and such school has smart tables, so we need smart tables. I said, that's not really why you want, like, that's not a good enough reason to spend the money. What do you want students to do with the smart tables? How is this going to enhance their learning? How is this going to enhance, like, help them achieve the outcomes? What is this doing? And I think a lot of times we see teachers pressed to incorporate technology for technology's sake. I call it clicky, clicky, bling, bling. That's what I call it with the students. I'm like, we're not going to do clicky, clicky, bling, bling, right? We're going to do purposeful. And you know what I mean by that. Like, say that. And everyone goes, I know exactly what you mean. Clicky, clicky, bling, bling. Shiny things, right? And so instead of incorporating it because it's shiny and it's new and the administration said you need to do it and we spent all this money on this tool, so use it, right? Instead, first start with your lesson. Start with your student outcomes. Figure out why you want to use this. Is it because you want to give the students greater choice? Is it because your culture in your classroom is your students love social media? They talk about social media all the time. So let's incorporate social media into this assignment. You know, let's give it real world application. Like, what is the reason why? And if you can't come up with a good why, then don't incorporate it. You don't need technology there. My mentor teacher for my entire 4 years, I was in a very great program at IU where I was in the same school with the same mentor teacher, almost like an apprenticeship for 3 of my 4 years. And he was the Indiana State Teacher of the Year a couple of years ago. You know, he's just a phenomenal English teacher. And when I went back to visit him a few years ago, he just didn't use technology much. And he was still an excellent teacher. Sure. You know, but that same question was asked, you know, well, this student wants to podcast instead of writing a paper. Should I do that? My answer was, well, why does the student want to podcast? And he said, well, they think they can go deeper into the content if they podcast. I said, can you still measure what you wanted to measure with the assignment if they podcast? And he said, yeah, but I worry that it's going to impact their writing skills, that they're not writing. I said, well, I'm pretty sure they have to write to do a podcast. So how can you incorporate the writing into that, right? And they ended up letting the student do a podcast. But you got to have that why. And our students struggle with the why because for so long they've seen technology being used mostly in traditional ways, like to take traditional assignments and just plop them into Google Classroom or without a lot of enhancement. So they struggle with that quite a bit, but they get outside of their experiences a little bit, and then they start being really creative.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's interesting. The smart table. I remember when those came out, and I had the same exact conversations. They wanted them, and I would say the same things. You know what? I agree with you. They are so cool. The way they operate, and the kids can manipulate things. But is it really? Let's talk about what you want to get out of it, and the cost of these tables is, yeah, I totally agree with you. And the mandated technology also, we've experienced that over the years, because a school or district will say, here, we bought these for you, and we want to see you incorporate this into your classroom, but it might not coincide with the teacher's style or their classroom experience that they create.
Years ago, the district where my kids are were rolling out smart boards. It wasn't smart, but it was an interactive whiteboard system. And they were so smart. And I will give kudos to Christian Long, who's now the tech director at Sycamore School District in Cincinnati, for the brilliant rollout by looking at those early adopters first. And instead of rolling out a smart board into every classroom or an interactive whiteboard into every classroom, they started with the early adopters. They let them, because they wanted to, take the equipment into their classroom, learn how to use it, demonstrate it, right? And then they could go show their colleagues. Yes. They could become the leaders in their building for using it. And then colleagues would get interested. Okay, I'm ready for an interactive whiteboard now. So instead of having a closet full of technology that's just sitting there, I mean, I've seen schools with entire iPad carts that haven't been updated in a year, and so no one can use them. And so before we start spending the money on technology, we have to know if teachers even want it, and we have to know if teachers will use it, and we have to know if it will actually improve the learning.
Right.
Yeah. And including them in the conversation, because I feel like sometimes that happens as well, you know, where it's between people who aren't going to be using it on a daily basis, that conversation of what to get or what to spend the money on or whatever. Teachers sometimes aren't included in those conversations.
And the students aren't included in the conversation.
Yeah. I'm also curious, do you have any tips that you would share with people on how to engage learners, or the best ways to engage learners or meet the needs of the most learners? Because we know that, especially when you've got a classroom full of kids, they don't all learn the same, but you're trying to meet the needs of each of them. Do you have any insight or wisdom on that one?
You know, I can talk a really good game in the higher education classroom about that. And then when you get into the field, I mean, I have 2 teenagers right now. I'm a mother of 2 teenagers. And I actually designed some health curriculum for my son's school district, and he's in that online health class now. And I think he forgot that I had designed it. And in the car the other day was like, it is so boring.
Oh.
So, you know, you can think that you are doing everything right, but the biggest thing is just listening to your students and what they need and what they want. It's not about entertainment. It's not about keeping them happy all the time. But when you look at universal design for learning, one of the most important things you can do when it comes to engagement, when we're really talking about engagement, right? We're really talking about persistence and getting them to the goal. We forget about checklists so often, and checklists are such an easy tool for the classroom. I've never met a student that doesn't benefit from a checklist. Just so they don't get lost in the process, so they can persist. I think making students aware of how the content connects to the world and to their other classes, to their future, you know, those are the things that we need to be paying attention to, because you can use any technology tool really, really well or really, really poorly. And it could be the best tool. And if it's only used to deliver a quiz in the classroom, it's probably not improving engagement. Audience response systems are one of my favorite tools and one of my least favorite tools all at one time, because they can produce discussion, they can produce critical thinking, group work, all of the things that, you know, when you're looking at UDL, say, ooh, this is going to increase engagement. and fun, right? We know fun increases engagement. My son and his girlfriend were using Blook It just for fun last night at a distance, like doing Blook Its together. I was like, okay. But it can also be used for nothing but rote memorization and repeat. And the students can get really distracted by the competition part of it. So they're not focused on the learning. They're just focused on the task, right? It's like, I'm task focused. I'm going to get it done versus I'm learning focused. And I'm going to pay attention to this. So I think it's definitely not about the tool or about the technology you choose. It's about how you use it. And universal design for learning is still my favorite resource when you're thinking about usability in a classroom of anything. And it makes you rethink engagement so that you're thinking about engagement from the why again perspective. I mean, you can tell why is one of my favorite words all the time. It's one of my favorite questions is why. Because when you're looking at the definition of engagement from a universal design perspective, you're not looking at engagement like, are they sitting up straight? Are they looking at the front of the room? Are they raising their hands? You can't see engagement. We're talking about cognitive engagement. Do I care about this? Why do I care about this? How is it relevant to me? Do I know what I'm supposed to be doing? Do I know how to complete it successfully? All of those things are really important when you're talking about engagement.
For sure. And I think some of those get lost. Or it's easy to get lost, especially when you're trying to survive.
And the fun is important too. I mean, you learn more when you're having fun. Like I totally get that. But then at the same time, keep it as simple as you can. Because the more complexity you add sometimes, there's the more confusion and the more work for everyone. And it's not necessarily more beneficial. So streamlining can also be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And I think depending on the age of the kid, that streamlining and consistency also can be beneficial in the engagement piece because they know what's expected. And that's, been established, which sometimes people don't maybe think that that's helpful. But depending on the age of the student, it really is beneficial to their learning, I think. So
when you work with your students, Sarah, I think one of the things that teachers struggle with when they are using technology is they feel like they need to be a master of that tool or that technique before they can ask their students to use it, because they want to be able to troubleshoot and have all of the answers. And that's hard for teachers not to have all those answers. So how do you guide your students in instructional design to help teachers get past that?
I mean, you definitely have to know how to use it, right? I mean, that you can't put a tool in your classroom you don't know how to use, you haven't played with, you haven't tried it yourself, you haven't had your own kids be guinea pigs, which I use my own kids all the time. Hey, log into this Seesaw. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you think. Try it. Record on it. I don't think you have to be an expert. And I think that's, we fall into that comparison trap. My daughter calls it the comparison trap, where she's looking at other people and going, I'm not as good as they at that as they are. So I'm not even going to try. And I think we have to stop worrying about that because no classroom is the same. We're all going to use tools differently to some extent. But so between not comparing yourself to the people around you and telling your students, hey, we're going to be trying this new tool together. And it may work and it may not, but we're going to learn from it no matter what. So I want you to help me. And I think when you look at the ISTE standards for educators, one of the top standards is learner. Right? So, and part of that standard for educators is you are learning technology with your students. And so if I don't know, I'm not a social media user, like I'm just not. And I know as an educational technologist, I should know social media well, but I don't like it. I don't use it. But I had students that wanted to use it for a project. And I said, well, you're going to have to help me learn it. We're going to have to learn it together. You'll show me what you're doing. If you can justify that this is going to enhance your project, then bring it in. We'll work on it together. We'll use it together. I have a group of students green screening in an elementary school right now with first graders. They're actually doing like creative writing prompts, and then they're turning them into green screen videos at the elementary school. They didn't know how to use the green screens first. So they took some time, individually to go sit with the technology and play with it. Take it home, try it with your roommates, play around with it. But they also were very aware that they needed a flexible mindset with it and that things were not going to work the first time. Like, you will run into roadblocks. Things will not always work. You just have to be flexible, have to have a plan B, have to have a backup plan. Admit to your students when it's the first time you're using a tool so they know that everything might not be perfect too. I saw one of the best technology first grade classrooms I've ever seen in my life. And the students went to use Flipgrid on their iPads and the flip didn't work. And this is a teacher who's been a technology coach in very large districts, who is, nationally recognized for her skill, and flips didn't work.
It happens.
Yeah. It happens. You go on. She said, all right, put your iPads down. We're just going to leave them for now. Let's go do this other thing. We'll come back to this tomorrow. We'll figure it out. Right. And the students learn to be flexible. And I think that's important for the students to see us as teachers be flexible, for us as teachers to not quit on things, for us as teachers to say, hey, I still need to learn this. And that's okay.
I like that. It's good advice. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk about the things we're passionate about. So I appreciated the conversation.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion today. If you like our podcast, please don't forget to subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released.
For more information about our podcast and to access links and resources referenced in this episode, check us out at fortheloveofedtech.org.